Good morning, everybody. So first of all, I'm sorry I cannot be there in person, but I think this is actually better for your health. So I want to give you a status update about SHARK-NIR. So some of you might think that I will be a little bit off topic with my presentation, and I have to say that in this case you are probably right. So, what is SHARK-NIR? SHARK-NIR is basically a camera for high contrast imaging with some spectroscopical capabilities. And its main aim is the detection and characterization of exoplanets, but of course it is also capable of to exploit all the scientific cases requiring obscuration of a central bright object to study the surrounding like disks and jets. So the instrument will be installed at one of the bent central Gregorian focal station at the LBT, and it is here, this color part here, and it is actually sharing the focal station with LBTI. So one peculiarity, which is also the strength of this instrument, is that it can work in synergy with two other LBT instruments, which is LMIRCAM board of LBTI and SHARK-Visible, which receive light from the same focal station of SHARK-NIR, but from the opposite side, so from here. I'm sorry, I just realized that SHARK-Vis is invisible in this picture, but it is in this area here. So the possibility of getting simultaneous imaging in the visible using SHARK-Visible, in the near infrared using SHARK-NIR, and in L and M band using LMIRCAM will be a unique feature of LBT. And this will allow to save a significant observing time for all that scientific cases requiring multi-wavelength observations. So here is just a list of the main characteristic of SHARK-NIR. I just want to show you the field of view is 18 by 18 arc-second, and the nominal internal Strel ratio of the instrument is very high, as we ideally would like to not to decrease the wavefront delivered by the adaptive optics module. So this is a view of the instrument, which, as you can see, is quite compact, as we are sharing the focal station with another instrument, and the optical bench here is very crowded. So this is the optical bench, while the golden part here is the scientific camera, which is inside a cryostat. So very briefly, the design is almost completely reflective and present two focal planes and two pupil planes, which allows to implement a variety of chronographic techniques. So just after the formable mirror, which is in the first pupil plane, we have the anodizing mask for the chronographic techniques, which requires resolution of the pupil. In the focal plane, we have all the occulters we will see in the next slides. And in a second pupil plane, we have the eostops, which basically masks the starlight diffracted out of the region of interest by the occulters. We have also some spectroscopic modes. So we have in the occulting, in the first focal plane, some slits with occulters, and in the second pupil plane, some dispersive elements. So a prism and a grism with a low and medium resolution. We also have a dual band imaging mode for observation requiring simultaneous multi-wave observation. And in this wheel, we have also the focusing lens, which can be used together with a Wollaston prism to perform phase diversity in scientific camera. So here we have the recipe to get the high contrast in the vicinity of a bright star. So we need, of course, a very high stellar ratio correction from the adaptive optics module. So in the case of SHARK-NIR, this module is not part of our instrument, but it is external and it is sold. And it was a talk by Guido yesterday about it. Then we need an optimized control strategy, which basically consists in the removal or mitigation of the non-common path aberration that we have between the adaptive optics module and our scientific camera, and in further decreasing the residual jitter of the star, as explained yesterday by Federico. And then the light from the central object must, of course, be suppressed in order to investigate its environment, and this requires coronagraphs. And finally, an adequate post-processing of the images is required to get rid of the spectrum. Having all of these, it is possible today to reach contrast of the order of 10 to the -6 in near infrared at 500 milliards seconds from the central object. So I don't want to spend many words on this, as Federico talked extensively about it yesterday. This is just to remind you that we have also an INGAS camera that can be read at high frame rate using a tip-tilt sensor, and a deformable mirror as an active element to compensate the residual jitter and the non-common path aberration, which are sensed on the scientific camera using phase diversity. So in SHARK-NIR, we have 3 different types of coronagraph. We have Gaussian LEO. It belongs to the class of LEO coronagraphers. So we have an amplitude mask in the focal plane followed by a circular stop in the subsequent pupil plane. So this solution basically allows to achieve better contrast at small angular separation with respect to classical LEO configuration, and in general, this provides a moderate contrast order of 10 to the -4 on the whole SHARK-NIR view. We have shade pupil, which consists of binary transmission pattern, which are the apodizing masks, applied in the pupil plane. Actually, in our case, is just after the pupil plane, to generate a high contrast region in the subsequent focal plane. And then a hard edge mask is placed on the focal plane to remove all the light falling out of this zone. And in the second pupil plane, we have a stop which removes the residual light diffracted at the border of the pupil by the focal plane mask. This particular coronagraph allowed to achieve a very high contrast, the order of 10 to the -5, very close to the central object of the order of 3 lambda/d. And finally, we have also a 4-quadrant phase mask, which is basically a mask suppressing the on-axis starlight using a phase mask in the focal plane. So the mask divides the light into the focal plane into 4 quadrants, and then we have 4 outcoming beams which combine destructively at infinity. And so the stellar light in the downstream pupil is totally rejected outside of the pupil area. So this coronagraph provides again high contrast but on a wide field of view, and it can reach very close to the central object. So in order to make some experience in aligning this coronagraph and learn how to interpret the results in advance, we set up an optical bench provided with 2 pupil planes and 2 focal planes, as it will be in SHARK-NIR. But to ease the alignment process, we have used visible monochromatic light at 633 nanometers and lenses instead of axis parabolas. So of course the lenses have been chosen in order to have the same PSF dimensions that we will have at the working wavelength on SHARK-NIR bench hitting the occulter. So we also have a polychromatic light source with can be injected, which is here, in the main path to a fiber with an unsolved core dimension and a pellicle beam splitter co-aligned to the laser beam. So the light can be filtered, this light can be filtered in order to have also narrow bands at different wavelengths of the coronagraph. So the first test we did is try to align the shade pupil. So in this case, we were more interested in finding and validating a procedure to relatively align the anodizing mask rather than in the contrast, measuring the contrast, as we have in our setup some significant differences from the final instrument. So first of all, the pupil image on the apodizer was not sampling the pupil telescope, but it was a few pupils. Then we did not operate it at the nominal wavelength, 633 nanometer, and at the time of this test, we also did not have the final LEO stops. So the alignment concept is relatively simple and relies in acquiring in a sequence an image of the apodizing mask and of the occulting mask. And acting on the removal position, we superimposed the two images. So this approach provided accuracy well within what we require in terms of alignment, centering, and rotation, while the alignment in focus was a bit trickier as it relied on the sharpness of the edges of the occulting mask image. Anyhow, we verified also the impact, the raw contrast for filter misalignment in centering and in focus. And we plotted the results in this curve. So here you can see that the raw contrast is impacted by a center of the mask by even 10 microns. So we can see it on the contrast, why it is much more tolerant to misalignment in focus, at least the setup we use in the lab, as all these curves spans at a range of 2 millimeters in the focus. So we then measure raw contrast with the one simulated, considering the boundary condition of our laboratory setup. And we can see that within the discovery space, which is this part here, the two results are in good agreement, giving a contrast of the order of 10 to the minus 4. And also the discovery space is very similar between theoretical and what we measured in the laboratory. So we also computed the raw contrast in a different way, which is basically simulating a planet located in the discovery space of the coronagraph. This fake planet is generated by the fiber, which is fed by a narrow band helium-neon filter light. Of course, the fiber was slightly the center, so the light of this fake planet was not occulted by the coronagraph, and the luminous intensity of such a fake planet has been calibrated to be the same as the 8th Aries ring of the central star, which has been measured to be a factor 10,000 dimmer than the central peak. And on the right image, you can see the planet, which is clearly visible in the detection space of the coronagraph with a signal-to-noise ratio of 36, and thus confirming the 10 to the minus 4 contrast we have measured before. So we also tested the 4-quadrant phase mask. So the components realized for SHARK-NIR have been designed by the Lesia at a wavelength of 1.6 micron and have been proven to provide a rejection of more than a factor of 500 in monochromatic light. So the PSF peak intensity with and without the coronagraph is a function of the wavelength. And so, as we said, it was optimized to work at 1.6 micron. So, but our test bench was not aligned to perform at such a wavelength. and modify it at 1.6 micron would have required to change all the lenses and detector. But luckily, our 4-quadrant mask has a local minimum in the attenuation also at around 550 nanometer. As you can see from this curve, our phase mask is the black line. And so in this way, we could test this mask in the visible part of the spectrum, which is for several reasons much easier. So we use as alignment beam the light from the fiber, filter at 550 nanometer with a bandwidth of 40 nanometer. Also, in this case, it is also fundamental to have the mask very well centered on the on-axis PSF. So illuminating the 4-quadrant phase mask with the diffuse light, it is possible to re-image on the focal plane the transition region between these quadrants, which are these two black lines here, which are magnified here. And using a Python script, we could determine the center of the transition region with an accuracy better than 1 micron. So here you can also see an image of the coronographic pupil, which, as we said before, the starlight is rejected out of the pupil area, so it is in this corner. And if we do not block it with a Leo stop on the pupil, on the final focal plane, we would obtain this image, so the 4-beam focusing. While, of course, if we mask, we obtain just the residual light from the central star. Of course, the exposure time of these two images is not the same. Here it is much longer exposure. So here we have the result we have obtained for the contrast and the rejection from our coronagraph. So the dotted black line is the theoretical PSF we would have obtained in lab, while the solid line is what we measured. And again, the red dotted line is what we would have, get in theory from this. Sorry. So the red dotted light is basically the contrast we would have get in theory using this coronagraph in simulation, while what we measure actually is the red solid line. And basically what we measure, well, I'm sorry. So what we were interested in was basically to calculate the rejection of this coronagraph. The rejection is calculated basically as the ratio between the total flux in a square region centered around the PSF with and without the coronagraph. So this has been computed in LESIA at the working wavelength of the coronagraph, obtaining a rejection factor 400 because of the different wavelength used in Padova and because of the different bandwidth of the light inciding on the coronagraph used in Padova. We would have expected a rejection 8 in Padova, while we measured 40, so factor 5 more. And this can be explained by some other differences between the test performed in LESIA and the one performed in Padova, such, for example, the dimension of the pupil in the setup, which was 11 millimeter in Padova versus the 30 millimeter used in LESIA. And this could have mitigated the effect of vibration and aberration on the mask. So The work on SHARK-NIR is proceeding also in other direction. So here, for example, you can see the SHARK-NIR optical bench in the clean room, where some of the optics, and basically all the mirrors in the optical path, have already been placed with a rough mechanical realignment. While on the optical bench on the left, we have all the beams that will be used for the optical alignment ready. So basically we have a converging beam from an interferometer used for the alignment of the reflective optics, mainly the off-axis parabola, and a laser beam for the alignment of the refractive optics. So we also work on the scientific camera. This is a sad story, as we received the scientific camera at the end of September, after having had the usual problem with the custom. So we had the camera in our lab for 4 or 5 days, and after which we had to ship back the camera to the custom because of other shipping issues. So nevertheless, we were able to run code the camera for 2.5 days, and this allowed us to test at least the cooling down and warming up procedure, and to verify that the cryostat stay cold for 52 hours, even in the worst orientation. And since we had liquid nitrogen for 2 weeks, we have used some of the remaining nitrogen to do some experiment in the lab. For example, some homemade liquid nitrogen ice cream. And we also tried to acquire some dark images, but we had experienced some issues with the camera software, which are being fixed also through a VPN we set up in order to allow people from your observatory to connect and debug. So the next steps will be hopefully to get back the scientific camera in November to continue performing tests here in Padova. The dispersive element should be in Padova in December, while the end of the IV phase is planned to be in May next year, so to be ready at the telescope in operation at the end of 2020. So that's it. Thanks for your attention.